I never thought my own parents would ban me from Thanksgiving dinner. But there I was, standing in my tiny kitchen 3 days before the holiday, holding my phone with trembling hands. My mother's voice still echoed in my ears. Troy, we've decided you shouldn't come this year. Madison's fiancé Derek wants a classy dinner, and honestly, your restaurant uniform would ruin the photos. This is important for Madison's future. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I whispered back, okay, got it, before hanging up feeling completely worthless and abandoned by the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. Thanksgiving morning arrived with the kind of gray November sky that matched my mood perfectly. I woke up in my cramped studio apartment above the laundromat on Maple Street, the familiar smell of detergent and fabric softener mixing with the aroma of my instant coffee. 26 years old, and this was my life. Single bed secondhand furniture and a mini fridge that hummed too loudly. The contrast with my sister Madison's lifestyle couldn't have been starker. While I heated up a cup of ramen noodles for my Thanksgiving feast, I couldn't help but scroll through social media. Big mistake. There they were, my family gathered around an elegant dining table that looked like something from a home decorating magazine. Crystal glasses caught the light from an ornate chandelier, and the turkey sat golden brown at the center of a spread that probably cost more than I made in a week at Giuseppe's diner. Mom wore her navy blue dress, the one she saved for special occasions, while Dad sported his best suit. Madison looked radiant in a cream-colored sweater that probably cost $300, her blonde hair perfectly styled in loose waves. But it was her fiancé who commanded attention in every photo. Derek Blackwell stood about 6 feet tall, with dark hair slicked back, and the kind of confident smile that spoke of money and privilege. His charcoal gray suit fit him like it was custom made, which it probably was. The gold watch on his wrist caught the camera flash, and even in the photos I could tell it was expensive. Real expensive. Everything about him screamed success, from his polished leather shoes to the way he carried himself with absolute confidence. The captions made my stomach turn. Grateful for our elegant family gathering, Mom had written. Celebrating with sophistication and class. Dad added to his post. Perfect evening with my perfect family. Derek had shared his arm possessively wrapped around Madison's waist. Perfect family. The words stung because I knew exactly what they meant. Perfect family didn't include the son who worked double shifts at a greasy diner to pay for community college classes. Perfect family didn't include the guy who came home every night smelling like French fry oil and burger grease. Perfect family certainly didn't include someone whose biggest accomplishment this year was making it through organic chemistry with a B-. I thought about my parents' reasoning, and honestly part of me understood it. Derek had money, obvious money, the kind that opened doors and created opportunities. Madison had always been the golden child graduating from State University with a marketing degree, while I struggled through 2 years of community college working every spare hour to afford textbooks and tuition. When she landed her job at prestigious marketing solutions downtown, Mom and Dad acted like she'd won the lottery. Meanwhile, I was the disappointment, the son who wasn't college material, according to Dad. Learn a trade, he'd said when I graduated high school. Not everyone's cut out for higher education. They'd refused to help with college costs, insisting I needed to figure out life on my own. So I did one grueling day at a time. Giuseppe's diner wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work. I started as a dishwasher at 18 and worked my way up to head server. The owner, Giuseppe himself, was a decent man who let me adjust my schedule around classes. The pay wasn't great, but the tips helped, especially during the lunch rush when the downtown office crowd came in. My uniform was simple black pants, white button-down shirt, black apron. Clean, professional, nothing to be ashamed of. But apparently it wasn't good enough for Derek's standards. Or maybe it wasn't good enough for my parents' new standards, now that they had a wealthy, future son-in-law to impress. As I slurped my sad excuse for Thanksgiving dinner, my phone buzzed. A text from my coworker Sarah, who'd been working the breakfast shift that morning. "Saw something weird earlier," she wrote. "You know your sister Madison, right blonde, always perfectly dressed." I texted back, "Yeah, what about her?" "Couple weeks ago I saw her at Murphy's bar downtown. Super late, like 2 in the morning. She was wasted, Troy, I mean really drunk. And she was with this older guy, not the fancy dude from her Instagram. This guy looked rough, like he'd been in fights. Madison seemed scared of him." My ramen suddenly tasted like cardboard. Sarah continued. "They were arguing about money, I think. I couldn't hear everything, but the guy kept grabbing her arm. She looked terrified. I almost called the cops, but then they left together. Wanted to tell you because something felt really wrong about the whole thing. This didn't make sense." According to Madison's social media, she'd been dating Derek for 6 months in what looked like a perfect fairy tale romance. Restaurant dates at expensive places, weekend getaways, to wine country shopping trips that ended with designer handbags and jewelry. Derek's Instagram showed the same timeline filled with romantic photos and captions about finding his soulmate. But Sarah was reliable, and she had no reason to lie. I'd worked with her for 3 years, and she was the type of person who noticed details and remembered faces. If she said she saw Madison with another man drunk and scared, then something was seriously wrong. I spent the rest of Thanksgiving Day trying to piece together the timeline. Madison's relationship with Derek seemed to appear out of nowhere 6 months ago. Before that, her social media showed the typical single-woman lifestyle, girls' nights out, work events, solo vacation photos. Then suddenly, Derek was everywhere like he'd been inserted into her life overnight. The whole situation felt off, but I couldn't put my finger on exactly why. Maybe it was the way Derek's smile never quite reached his eyes in photos, or how Madison's captions about their relationship seemed forced and overly enthusiastic. Or maybe it was just my own jealousy talking the bitter disappointment of being excluded from my family's celebration. But Sarah's observation nagged at me. If Madison was seeing another man just 2 weeks ago, what did that mean for her engagement to Derek? And why would she be scared Madison wasn't the type to be afraid of anyone? She'd always been confident, assertive, sometimes even aggressive when she wanted something. As night fell and the loneliness of spending Thanksgiving alone really hit me, I made a decision. I was going to find out what was really going on with my sister. Call it brotherly concern or simple curiosity, but something told me that Derek's perfect facade was hiding something dark. And if Madison was in trouble, family problems aside, I couldn't just stand by and do nothing. The first step would be learning more about Derek Blackwell himself. The next morning, I woke up with a determination I hadn't felt in months. My shift at Giuseppe's didn't start until the lunch rush, giving me several hours to investigate Derek Blackwell. I made strong coffee in my ancient coffee maker and settled at my secondhand laptop, ready to dig into social media profiles and public records. Derek's Instagram account looked impressive at first glance. Expensive restaurants, luxury cars, business meetings, and sleek conference rooms. But as I scrolled deeper, red flags started appearing. Every photo was recent, dating back only 4 months. No childhood photos, no college memories, no long-term friendships documented. For a man who appeared to be in his early 30s, his digital footprint was surprisingly shallow. His LinkedIn profile claimed he was a senior investment consultant at something called Meridian Capital Solutions. The company's website looked professional, full of stock photos and vague descriptions of wealth management services and exclusive client portfolios. But when I searched for news articles or business reviews, nothing came up. The address listed led to a generic office building that housed dozens of small businesses. I cross-referenced Derek's photos with reverse image searches, hoping to find inconsistencies. Most came up clean, but several of the business meeting photos appeared to be stock images available for purchase online. The luxury car he posed with in several shots was identified through license plate research as belonging to a rental company downtown. Growing more suspicious, I decided to take a different approach. Madison's apartment complex was only 20 minutes away by bus. I grabbed the childhood book she'd mentioned wanting back during our last conversation 3 months ago, a beat-up copy of Where the Red Fern Grows that had been gathering dust on my shelf. It would give me a legitimate reason to visit. The Grandview Apartments sat in one of the city's nicer neighborhoods with manicured landscaping and a gated parking garage. Madison's marketing job paid well enough for her to afford a one-bedroom unit on the 3rd floor. I buzzed her apartment number, but got no response. However, the main entrance opened when another resident left and I slipped inside. The parking garage revealed more disturbing details. Derek's supposed luxury sedan sat in a visitor's spot, but the rental company barcode was clearly visible on the rear windshield. The car itself was immaculate, too perfect, like it had never been personally owned. I jotted down the license plate number for later research. Madison's apartment windows faced the courtyard, and from the stairwell, I could see inside through a gap in her curtains. She was home pacing frantically while talking on her phone. Even from a distance, her body language screamed distress. She gestured wildly with her free hand, running fingers through her hair repeatedly. At one point, she threw herself onto her couch and buried her face in her hands. I wanted to knock to check on her, but something held me back. If Sarah was right about seeing Madison with another man, and if Derek wasn't who he claimed to be, then my appearance might make things worse. I needed more information first. That's when I noticed the car across the street. A dark blue sedan with out-of-state plates was parked in the visitor lot of the apartment complex across from Madison's building. The driver appeared to be watching her windows through binoculars. When I moved closer to get a better look, the figure matched Sarah's description perfectly, an older man with graying hair, weathered features, and the kind of thick build that suggested a history of physical confrontations. I tried to approach casually, pretending to check my phone while walking in his direction. But the moment he spotted me, the engine started, and he sped away, tires squealing against the asphalt. I managed to catch a partial license plate and noticed significant damage to the rear bumper, like the car had been in a recent accident. Back at my apartment, I researched the license plate through a friend who worked at the DMV. The car was registered to a Marcus Dalton in Nevada with a criminal record that included assault, theft, and fraud charges. A man with Marcus's description had been spotted at several financial fraud cases across the western states, always as a suspected accomplice rather than the main perpetrator. The pieces started forming a disturbing picture. Derek wasn't just hiding his true identity, he was part of a criminal operation. Madison wasn't in a fairy tale romance. She was either an unwitting victim or somehow caught up in whatever scheme Derek was running. And Marcus Dalton wasn't just a random observer. He was surveillance, making sure Madison stayed in line. I thought about calling the police, but what could I tell them? That my sister's fiancé might be using a fake identity? That someone was watching her apartment without concrete evidence of a crime? They'd likely dismiss my concerns as family drama. Instead, I decided to call Madison directly. Her phone went straight to voicemail, but I left a message trying to sound casual. "Hey, it's Troy. Found that book you wanted. Want to grab coffee sometime this week? I miss talking to you." She called back within an hour, and her voice sounded strained, almost frightened. "Troy, now isn't a good time. I'm really busy with wedding planning and work. Maybe after the holidays." "Madison, are you okay? You sound upset." "I'm fine. Everything's fine. Derek's just been stressed about business, and we're trying to plan the perfect wedding. You know how it is." But I could hear something else in her voice, fear. My confident, assertive sister sounded like she was reading from a script, saying words she didn't believe. When I pressed her about meeting in person, she made excuses and quickly ended the call. That night I couldn't sleep. Every instinct told me Madison was in danger, but I felt powerless to help her. My parents were so dazzled by Derek's wealth and charm that they'd never believe my suspicions. And Madison herself seemed unable or unwilling to tell me the truth. I spent hours researching Marcus Dalton and similar fraud cases, learning about romance scams that targeted wealthy families. The pattern was always the same. A charming con artist would seduce a woman from an affluent family, gain access to financial information, then disappear with whatever money he could steal. Sometimes there was blackmail involved, sometimes there were threats. As dawn broke through my apartment windows, one thought kept recurring. If Derek was running a con game on my family, then excluding me from Thanksgiving wasn't about my restaurant uniform or maintaining a classy atmosphere. It was about keeping me away long enough for Derek to assess my parents' wealth and plan his next move. My exclusion from the family dinner wasn't personal humiliation. It was a calculated part of a criminal plan. And that realization filled me with a cold anger that burned stronger than any hurt feelings about missed holidays. Derek had made a serious mistake. He'd underestimated the wrong brother. Saturday morning brought an unexpected knock on my door. I opened it to find Dad standing in the hallway, looking uncomfortable, in his weekend casual clothes, khakis, and a polo shirt that Mom had probably laid out for him. His silver hair was neatly combed, and his expression carried the same stern disappointment I'd grown up with, but something else lurked underneath. Uncertainty. "Troy, we need to talk." I stepped aside to let him in, watching him take in my modest living space with barely concealed disapproval. He'd never visited my apartment before, and I could see him calculating the cost of my rent against what he assumed I could afford on a server's wages. "Dad, if this is about Thanksgiving." "It's not about that." He sat heavily on my secondhand couch, the springs creaking under his weight. "Well, not entirely. Your mother feels bad about how we handled things, but that's not why I'm here." I poured him coffee in my cleanest mug and waited. Dad had always been a man of few words, preferring to let his actions speak for him. When he did talk, it was usually to deliver criticism or instructions. Heart-to-heart conversations weren't his style. "I've been thinking about what you said on the phone yesterday, about Derek not being who he seems." I hadn't expected this. After our brief, tense conversation, when I'd tried to voice my concerns, I'd assumed he'd dismissed me entirely. "You believe me. I don't know what to believe. But I've been in banking for 30 years, Troy. I know how to read people and I know how to spot financial red flags." He rubbed his forehead, suddenly looking older than his 58 years. "Derek's been asking a lot of questions about our family finances." My stomach tightened. What kind of questions? Started innocent enough? Retirement planning, investment strategies, that sort of thing. Said he wanted to make sure Madison would be financially secure after they married. But then he got more specific. Wanted to know about account numbers, our mortgage balance, your mother's inheritance from her father. This was worse than I'd imagined. "Did you give him any information?" Dad's silence was answer enough. The color drained from his face as he continued. He seemed so knowledgeable about financial planning, had all these sophisticated strategies, talked about tax shelters and international investments, made me feel like an amateur for keeping everything in simple savings accounts and CDs. "Dad, you need to check your accounts, all of them, today." I already did. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Someone tried to access our main savings account on Wednesday. The bank's fraud department caught it and froze the account, but Troy, whoever tried to get in, knew details that only family members should know." The room felt like it was spinning. Derek hadn't just been running a romance scam. He'd been positioning himself to rob my family blind. "Have you told Mom, Madison?" "I told your mother this morning. She's devastated. Keeps saying it must be a mistake, that Derek would never do anything like that. But she agreed we needed to investigate further before confronting Madison." Dad pulled out his phone and showed me several screenshots. "I called my friend Bill Morrison at First National, asked him to look into Derek's supposed business credentials. Meridian Capital Solutions doesn't exist in any state business registry. The address leads to a mail forwarding service." I felt a mix of vindication and terror. My suspicions were correct, but that meant Madison was in serious danger. Dad, there's more you need to know. I told him about Marcus Dalton, about the surveillance, about Madison's strange behavior, and Sarah's observation at Murphy's bar. With each detail, Dad's expression grew grimmer. By the time I finished, his hands were clenched into fists. My little girl, he whispered. What has she gotten herself into? I don't think she got herself into anything. I think Derek targeted her specifically because she came from a family with money. Dad stood up abruptly, pacing the small length of my apartment. We have to call the police. And tell them what that Madison's fiancé might be using a fake name that someone tried to access your bank account. They'll want evidence, Dad. Real evidence. Then we get evidence. I'm going to call Derek, ask him to meet me for lunch. Feel him out, see if I can get him to reveal something incriminating. That's too dangerous. If he realizes you're onto him, Troy, this man is planning to rob my family and possibly hurt my daughter. I'm not going to sit around doing nothing. I understood his frustration, but confronting Derek directly would likely make things worse. Let me handle this. I have a plan, but I need you to trust me. Dad studied my face for a long moment. Throughout my childhood and teenage years, he'd never really trusted my judgment. I was the screw-up, the disappointment, the son who needed constant guidance and correction. But something in my expression must have convinced him that I was serious. What kind of plan? Derek doesn't know I'm suspicious. As far as he's concerned, I'm just the loser brother who got excluded from Thanksgiving. I can get close to him without raising red flags. How? Madison mentioned they're having dinner at Romano's tonight. Upscale place downtown. I'll happen to be there, maybe bump into them accidentally. See if I can observe Derek's behavior, maybe overhear some conversation. Dad shook his head. That's too risky. What if Derek recognizes you as a threat? He won't. To him, I'm invisible. Just a minimum wage worker who's jealous of his success. Sometimes being underestimated is an advantage. We spent the next hour planning. Dad would monitor his bank accounts and change all his passwords. He'd also contact the other families in our social circle, warning them subtly about potential financial scams. Meanwhile, I would gather more evidence about Derek's true identity and criminal connections. As Dad prepared to leave, he turned back to me with an expression I'd never seen before. Respect? Maybe even a little pride. Troy, I owe you an apology. For Thanksgiving, for the way we've treated you over the years. You're a good man, and I've been too blind to see it. The words hit harder than any criticism he'd ever delivered. For 26 years, I'd been waiting to hear something like that from him. But there would be time for family reconciliation later. Right now, we had to save Madison and stop Derek before he destroyed everything our family had worked for. Just be careful, Dad. We don't know how far Derek is willing to go to protect his scheme. After he left, I sat alone with the weight of responsibility settling on my shoulders. My family was counting on me to solve this mess, despite years of treating me like I couldn't handle serious situations. The irony wasn't lost on me. The son they deemed not college material was now their best hope for outsmarting a sophisticated criminal. But I had advantages Derek couldn't have anticipated. Working at Giuseppe's had taught me to read people quickly, to spot lies and manipulative behavior. Years of being ignored and underestimated had made me observant, patient, good at blending into the background. And most importantly, I had something Derek lacked: genuine love for my family, despite all their flaws. Tonight at Romano's, I would begin turning the tables on Derek Blackwell, or David Kellerman, or whatever his real name was. The man who thought he could con my family had no idea what kind of fight he'd picked. Romano's restaurant occupied the corner of 5th and Main. Its warm lighting and exposed brick walls, creating the kind of ambiance that justified $30 entrees. I'd never eaten there myself, but I'd walked past it countless times on my way to Giuseppe's. Tonight I positioned myself at the bar with a clear view of the dining room, nursing a beer I could barely afford, and trying to look like just another guy unwinding after work. Madison and Derek arrived at 8:15, and seeing them together in person revealed details that photos couldn't capture. Madison moved differently than usual, her confident stride replaced by careful, measured steps. She kept glancing at Derek before speaking to the hostess like she needed his approval for basic interactions. This wasn't the assertive sister I'd grown up with. Derek commanded attention effortlessly. Tall, impeccably dressed in what appeared to be another custom suit he carried himself, with the kind of confidence that came from always being the smartest person in the room. The hostess smiled warmly as he slipped her what looked like a $20 tip for seating them at their requested table. I moved closer, pretending to check my phone while eavesdropping on their conversation. Derek was discussing wedding venues, his voice smooth and charming, as he described a perfect location he'd found in wine country. But Madison's responses were mechanical, lacking any genuine enthusiasm. The vineyard can accommodate 200 guests, Derek was saying. Very exclusive. The kind of place that photographs beautifully for social media. That sounds lovely, Madison replied, but her voice was flat. She twisted her engagement ring nervously, a gesture I'd never seen her make before. Derek's phone buzzed and his entire demeanor shifted when he read the message. The charming mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. "Excuse me, sweetheart, business call." He stepped away from the table, and I watched Madison's shoulders sag with relief. She pulled out her own phone and quickly typed a message, her fingers trembling. When Derek returned 5 minutes later, she'd composed herself again, but I could see the tension in her jaw. Their dinner proceeded with stilted conversation about wedding plans, Derek's supposed business deals, and Madison's work. But I noticed how Derek steered every topic back to family finances. He mentioned wanting to establish joint bank accounts, talked about investment opportunities that required family participation, and suggested that Madison's parents might want to contribute to their financial portfolio. Although, the most telling moment came when Derek excused himself to use the restroom. Madison immediately pulled out her phone again, and this time I could see tears in her eyes as she typed. Whatever message she was sending, it looked desperate. I made my decision. When Derek disappeared down the hallway toward the restrooms, I approached Madison's table. "Madison, is that you?" She looked up startled, and her face went white when she recognized me. "Troy, what are you doing here?" "Having dinner at the bar. Thought I'd say hello." I kept my voice casual but leaned closer. "Are you okay? You seem upset." "I'm fine. Everything's perfect. Derek and I are just discussing wedding plans." But as she spoke, she grabbed my wrist and pressed something small into my palm, a folded piece of paper. Her eyes darted toward the hallway, where Derek had disappeared, then back to me with an expression of pure terror. "Troy, you need to leave. Now, before Derek comes back." "Madison, what's going on? You can tell me." "I can't. Please just go. And whatever you do, don't try to contact me again." The desperation in her voice convinced me not to push further. I palmed the note she'd given me and returned to the bar just as Derek emerged from the hallway. He scanned the dining room briefly, his gaze passing right over me without recognition. To him, I was just another working-class guy having a beer, invisible. I paid my tab and left the restaurant, my heart pounding with anticipation and fear. Outside in my car, I unfolded Madison's note under the dome light. The message was written in her neat handwriting, but the words made my blood run cold. "Troy, Derek isn't who he claims to be. His real name is David Kellerman. He has photos and videos that could ruin my career. He's blackmailing me to stay in the relationship and help him access family money. There's another man named Marcus watching me. They threaten to hurt all of you if I try to leave or tell anyone. Don't trust anything Derek says. Don't let Mom and Dad meet with him alone." I'm so scared. I tried to break up with him 3 weeks ago when I found forged documents in his briefcase, but he showed me what he'd recorded of me during our early dates. Compromising stuff from when I was drinking and using cocaine. He said he'd send everything to my boss and post it online if I didn't cooperate. The man you might have seen watching my apartment is Marcus. He has a violent criminal record. Derek told me Marcus would teach our family a lesson if I didn't help with their plan. I begged them to exclude you from Thanksgiving because Derek was planning to target you next, and I knew you'd see through his act immediately. I was trying to protect you, but I've made everything worse. Help me, but be careful. These men are dangerous. I read the note 3 times each reading, making me angrier and more determined. My sister wasn't living a fairy tale romance. She was trapped in a nightmare, being blackmailed and threatened by criminals who'd infiltrated our family. The exclusion from Thanksgiving hadn't been about class differences or photo opportunities. Madison had been trying to protect me from becoming Derek's next target. The full scope of Derek's plan became clear. He'd researched our family, identified Madison as the perfect entry point, and seduced her specifically to gain access to our parents' financial information. When Madison discovered his true identity and tried to escape, he'd used blackmail and threats to keep her trapped in the relationship. But Derek had made several crucial mistakes. He'd underestimated Madison's intelligence and resourcefulness. He'd assumed that excluding me from family gatherings would keep me safely out of the picture. And most importantly, he had no idea that his criminal operation was now under surveillance by someone who had nothing left to lose. I drove home with a new sense of purpose. Tomorrow, I would contact Dad with Madison's information and begin building a case that would destroy Derek's operation completely. But tonight, I needed to prepare for what would likely be the most dangerous confrontation of my life. Because Derek and Marcus were about to learn that they'd picked the wrong family to target, and they'd seriously underestimated the wrong brother. Sunday morning brought an early phone call that shattered any hope of a peaceful resolution. Dad's voice was tight with panic. "Troy, you need to get over here. Now." "Derek knows that Madison told us everything." I threw on clothes and drove to my parents' house in record time, my hands gripping the steering wheel as worst-case scenarios raced through my mind. The suburban neighborhood where I'd grown up looked deceptively peaceful. In the morning sunlight, with neat lawns and minivans parked in driveways. Nothing suggested that a criminal conspiracy was unraveling just beneath the surface. I found my family gathered in the living room, and the scene immediately told me how bad things had gotten. Mom sat on the couch clutching a box of tissues, her eyes red from crying. Madison paced by the windows, her phone clutched in her trembling hands. Dad stood near the fireplace, his face set in grim determination. "Derek called Madison an hour ago," Dad explained without preamble. "He knows she passed you information. He's threatening to release the compromising materials today unless the family pays him $50,000. My stomach dropped. "How could he know?" Madison turned from the window, her face streaked with tears. "I don't know. Maybe he has my phone bugged, or maybe Marcus saw us talking at the restaurant. Derek said he has backup copies of everything stored in multiple locations, and that if we involve the police, the materials will automatically be sent to my employer, my professional contacts, and posted on social media." "That's not all," Mom added, her voice shaking. "He wants to meet with all of us this afternoon. Said we need to discuss the family's financial future, and that Madison's career depends on our cooperation. The manipulation was textbook criminal behavior, but that didn't make it any less effective. Derek had engineered a situation where my family felt completely trapped with Madison's professional reputation hanging in the balance." "Where does he want to meet?" I asked. "Here," Dad replied. Said neutral territory would be more comfortable for everyone. "But Troy, there's something else. Derek specifically asked that you be present. Said it was important that the whole family participate in the discussion." This was wrong on every level. Criminal blackmailers didn't usually insist on including additional witnesses unless they had a specific reason. My inclusion in Derek's plan suggested something more sinister than simple extortion. "He wants me there for a reason," I said, thinking out loud. "Either to intimidate me into silence, or because I'm part of whatever he's planning next." Madison's phone buzzed and she answered it with shaking hands. "Hello, Derek." Even from across the room, I could hear the cold authority in Derek's voice. Madison, sweetheart, I trust your family understands the seriousness of our situation. I'll be there at 2 o'clock with my business associate. Make sure everyone is present and ready to discuss our arrangement. Derek, please, we can work something out. You don't need to. 2 o'clock, Madison. And remember, I have insurance policies in place. If anything unfortunate happens to me, those materials will be distributed automatically. The line went dead and Madison collapsed onto the couch next to Mom. He's bringing Marcus with him. They're coming here. I looked around at my family, seeing genuine fear in their eyes for the first time in my life. Dad had always been the rock, the provider who solved problems through determination and hard work. Mom had been the nurturer, the one who held everything together with optimism and stubborn love. Madison had been the achiever, the golden child who succeeded at everything she attempted. But this situation was beyond their experience. They'd lived comfortable, law-abiding lives in safe neighborhoods with predictable challenges. They had no framework for dealing with criminal blackmail and threats of violence. I, on the other hand, had grown up watching my back. Working at Giuseppe's had exposed me to all kinds of people, including those who operated outside the law. I'd learned to spot trouble before it found me to de-escalate dangerous situations and to think quickly under pressure. My working-class life hadn't been glamorous, but it had prepared me for exactly this kind of confrontation. I have a plan, I announced, pulling out my phone. But I need everyone to trust me completely. For the next 3 hours, I orchestrated what would become the most elaborate setup of my life. First, I called my friend Jake Martinez, who worked as a dispatcher for the city police department. Jake owed me a favor from when I'd helped him move apartments last year. And more importantly, he understood the limitations of what police could do without concrete evidence. Jake, I needed advice about a blackmail situation. Hypothetically, if someone was being extorted and threatened, but the criminals were careful not to leave evidence, how would you recommend building a case? Jake's response was exactly what I'd hoped for. Hypothetically, you'd want recordings. Video if possible, but audio would work. Get them to admit their crimes on tape, and you've got them. Next, I set up my apartment as a recording studio. My laptop had built-in camera and microphone capabilities, and I positioned it to capture the entire living room area. I also downloaded a smartphone app that would allow me to live stream video to cloud storage, ensuring that even if my devices were destroyed, the evidence would survive. But the most important element of my plan was psychological. Derek saw himself as the smartest person in any room, someone who could manipulate and intimidate ordinary people into submission. His confidence came from always being in control. I needed to flip that dynamic to make him feel threatened and desperate enough to reveal the full scope of his criminal operation. At 1:45, I received a text message that made my blood run cold. Change of plans. Meet at your apartment instead. Come alone, or Madison's career ends today. Derek had outmaneuvered me. By changing the location to my apartment, he'd eliminated my family's support and put me in an isolated, vulnerable position. Worse, the message suggested that he'd been watching my apartment, studying my routines, planning this confrontation carefully. I had 15 minutes to prepare for what might be the most dangerous encounter of my life. But as I checked my recording equipment one final time, I realized that Derek had made a crucial mistake. By insisting that I come alone, he'd underestimated the most important advantage I possessed, the absolute certainty that I would do anything to protect my family. 2 o'clock brought the sound of footsteps on the stairs outside my apartment. Through the peephole, I could see Derek in his usual expensive suit, but today his polished exterior couldn't hide the tension in his shoulders. Behind him stood Marcus Dalton, exactly matching Sarah's description: graying hair, weathered features, and the kind of thick build that spoke of serious time spent in gyms or possibly prisons. I opened the door with my phone already recording, the device positioned to look like I was casually checking messages while actually capturing everything. Derek, Marcus. I stepped aside to let them enter, noting how Marcus immediately moved to position himself between me and the door. Classic intimidation tactics. Troy. Derek's voice carried its usual smooth confidence, but something underneath suggested he was operating under pressure. Thank you for agreeing to meet. We have some family business to discuss. My small apartment felt even smaller with 3 men inside. Derek surveyed the space with barely concealed disdain, taking in my second-hand furniture and modest living conditions. Marcus remained silent, but his eyes constantly scanned the room, looking for potential weapons or escape routes. "Where's the rest of your family?" Derek asked, settling onto my couch like he owned it. "They're scared," I replied honestly. "Figured it would be better if we talked man to man first." Derek smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Smart. Because what we're discussing today is going to determine your sister's future and, frankly, your family's financial security. I sat across from them, keeping my phone positioned to capture both men in the frame. Madison told me about the photos, about the blackmail. Such an ugly word, Derek said smoothly. I prefer to think of it as insurance. Your sister made some poor choices early in our relationship, experimenting with substances, compromising situations. I simply documented everything for posterity. Marcus spoke for the first time, his voice a gravelly rasp that suggested years of cigarettes or maybe previous throat injuries. The girl was wild, party animal. Derek just happened to be there with a camera when things got interesting. But here's the thing. Derek continued, leaning forward with the kind of predatory focus I'd seen in nature documentaries. Those materials don't have to see the light of day. Your family can make this whole problem disappear. For $50,000. That's just the beginning, Troy. See, your parents have been very careless with their financial information. Account numbers, investment details, retirement portfolios. Amazing what people will share when they trust someone. The casual admission sent ice through my veins, but I kept my expression neutral. You're talking about robbing my family. I'm talking about redistributing wealth that your family didn't really earn anyway. Derek replied, his mask slipping slightly. Your father spent 30 years moving other people's money around. Your mother inherited everything from her daddy's insurance business. Madison got handed a college education and a job through connections. None of you ever worked for anything real. Marcus added, rich families like yours never miss what they lose. But people like us, we earn every dollar the hard way. I felt anger building in my chest, but forced myself to stay calm. They were revealing more than they realized, and my phone was capturing every word. So this is just business for you? Exactly, Derek said. And you're going to help us make it work. What do you mean? Derek's smile turned genuinely predatory. See, Troy, you're the key to the whole operation. Your parents trust you now that you've played the concerned brother. Madison listens to you because of family loyalty. And most importantly, nobody suspects the minimum wage restaurant worker of being involved in financial crimes. The pieces clicked together with horrifying clarity. Derek hadn't changed the meeting location to isolate me. He'd brought me here to recruit me. You want me to help you rob my own family? I want you to help your family make a smart financial decision, Derek corrected. Your parents are going to transfer money into accounts that I control. You're going to convince them it's necessary to protect Madison's reputation. And everyone's going to live happily ever after. And if I refuse, Marcus cracked his knuckles, the sound loud in the small apartment. Then Madison's career ends tomorrow and your family gets to watch their financial accounts get drained anyway. But it'll be a lot more painful for everyone involved. Derek stood up, straightening his suit jacket. You see, Troy, we've been watching your family for months. We know your parents' routines, where Madison works, what time you leave for your little restaurant job. Marcus here has gotten very familiar with all your daily schedules. The threat was unmistakable, but Derek had just made the mistake I'd been waiting for. In his arrogance, he'd revealed the full scope of their criminal operation: blackmail, extortion, identity theft, financial fraud, and implied threats of violence. There's just one problem with your plan, I said, standing up slowly. What's that? You picked the wrong family to mess with. I held up my phone showing the recording app that had been running since they arrived. And you definitely underestimated the wrong brother. Derek's face went white as he realized what he was looking at. You recorded us everything. The blackmail, the financial fraud, the threats. It's all being uploaded to cloud storage as we speak. I smiled for the first time since they'd arrived. But here's the really beautiful part. I've been live streaming this entire conversation. Marcus lunged toward me, but I was ready. I wouldn't do that, Marcus. My friend Jake Martinez has been watching the stream from the police dispatch office. Units are already en route. The sound of sirens in the distance confirmed my words, growing steadily louder as they approached my building. Derek's smooth confidence crumbled as he realized how completely he'd been outmaneuvered. You're supposed to be a nobody. Derek snarled, his cultivated accent slipping to reveal something harsher underneath. A minimum wage loser who works in a greasy diner. Maybe, but this minimum wage loser just destroyed your entire operation. Marcus was looking around frantically for an escape route, but my apartment's only exit was blocked by the approaching footsteps of responding officers. Derek pulled out his phone, probably hoping to activate whatever dead man's switch he'd claimed to have for Madison's compromising materials. Go ahead, I told him. Make that call. My live stream audience is watching, and everything you do now is being recorded by multiple witnesses. The footsteps stopped outside my door, followed by the authoritative knock I'd been waiting for. Police, open up. Derek's phone slipped from his trembling hands as the full reality of his situation hit him. His carefully constructed criminal operation was collapsing in real-time broadcast live to anyone who cared to watch. But the most satisfying moment came when Derek looked directly at me. His face twisted with rage and disbelief, and said the words that would haunt him for the rest of his criminal career. You're supposed to be dead. I paid Marcus to make sure the accident looked real when you were driving home from work last month. The confession that spilled from Derek's lips in that moment of panic was more devastating than anything I could have planned. The hit-and-run accident that had totaled my car and left me with a concussion and bruised ribs wasn't random bad luck. It was attempted murder orchestrated by the man who was supposed to become my brother-in-law. The police officers who burst through my door had heard Derek's admission through their radio connection to dispatch. My friend Jake had been monitoring the live stream and immediately alerted responding units to the confession of attempted homicide. Marcus tried to deny everything, but the recording was crystal clear. Within hours, Derek's entire criminal network began unraveling. His real name was indeed David Kellerman, and he had warrants in Nevada, Oregon, and California for similar romance scams. Marcus Dalton was wanted in connection with assault cases linked to Derek's previous operations. The rental car Derek had been using was traced to a company that specialized in vehicles for criminals trying to establish false identities. The compromising materials Derek claimed to have of Madison turned out to be largely fabricated or heavily edited. The few genuine photos and videos showed Madison in typical college-age party situations, nothing that would realistically damage her career. Derek's blackmail had been built on shame and fear rather than actual career-ending content. Most importantly, the financial damage to my family was minimal. Dad's quick action in freezing accounts and changing passwords had prevented any actual theft. The attempted access that triggered the bank's fraud alert was Derek's only real attempt to steal money, and it had been blocked before any funds were transferred. The legal proceedings moved swiftly. Derek and Marcus both faced federal charges due to the multi-state nature of their crimes. The attempted murder charge against Derek carried a potential life sentence, while Marcus's assault and fraud charges would likely result in decades in prison. Both men eventually plea bargained to avoid trial, but still received substantial prison sentences. The investigation revealed that Derek had targeted at least 7 other families across the western United States successfully stealing over $200,000 before meeting my family. His modus operandi was always the same: seduce a daughter from a wealthy family, gain access to financial information, then disappear with whatever money he could steal. My family had been his most ambitious target yet, which explained why he'd been willing to resort to attempted murder when I threatened his plans. But the real transformation happened within my family itself. The crisis had stripped away years of accumulated resentments and misunderstandings, forcing us to see each other clearly for the first time. Dad was the first to acknowledge how wrong he'd been about my capabilities. Troy, I spent 26 years thinking you weren't ambitious enough, weren't smart enough to handle serious responsibilities. But you saved our entire family. You saw through Derek's deception when the rest of us were completely fooled. The conversation took place in my parents' living room 2 weeks after Derek's arrest. Dad had driven to my apartment that morning, asking if I wanted to have coffee and talk. It was the first time he'd initiated a personal conversation with me since I was a child. I realize now that working at the restaurant, putting yourself through college, supporting yourself independently, all of that took more strength and intelligence than anything Madison or I ever accomplished, he continued. We had advantages handed to us. You created your own opportunities from nothing. Mom was even more emotional in her apology. Troy, honey, I'm so ashamed of how we excluded you from Thanksgiving. We were so dazzled by Derek's money and charm that we forgot what really matters in a family. You're our son, and you should always be welcome at our table regardless of what you wear or where you work. Madison's transformation was the most profound. The ordeal had shattered her confidence in superficial markers of success and forced her to examine what she really valued in life. I was so caught up in the fairy tale, she admitted during one of our long conversations after Derek's arrest. The expensive restaurants, the designer gifts, the idea of marrying into wealth. I ignored every red flag because I wanted to believe I was special enough to land a rich, successful man. She'd taken a leave of absence from her marketing job to attend counseling, working through the trauma of being manipulated and threatened. But you know what I realized? Troy, Derek was right about one thing. I did have advantages handed to me: college tuition, family connections, a nice apartment I could afford because of family help. You built everything yourself, and that's infinitely more impressive than anything I've achieved. The family reconciliation culminated in a new Thanksgiving celebration held 3 weeks after the original dinner I'd been excluded from. This time I was the guest of honor, and my parents insisted I invite friends from work. Giuseppe himself came along with Sarah and several other co-workers who'd become my chosen family over the years. The difference in atmosphere was remarkable. Instead of formal place settings and expensive wine, we had a potluck dinner with dishes that reflected our diverse backgrounds and experiences. Instead of posing for perfect social media photos, we spent the evening telling stories and laughing together. Instead of trying to impress anyone, we simply enjoyed being together. Dad announced during dinner that he and Mom wanted to contribute to my college expenses, not as charity, but as recognition that education was an investment in our family's future. You've proven that you can accomplish anything you set your mind to, he said. We want to support your goals, whatever they are. But the most unexpected development came from Derek's downfall itself. The private investigation firm that had assisted police with tracking Derek's criminal network offered me a job based on my work in unraveling his operation. My combination of street smarts, attention to detail, and ability to remain calm under pressure made me an ideal candidate for investigations work. The job offer represented more than just a career change. It was validation that my life experiences had value beyond what my family had previously recognized. All those years of working with diverse groups of people, reading customers' moods and motivations, thinking quickly on my feet during busy restaurant shifts, had prepared me for work that required insight into human behavior and criminal psychology. I accepted the position, but I didn't quit Giuseppe's immediately. Instead, I arranged to work part-time at both jobs, maintaining my connection to the restaurant while building experience in my new career. Giuseppe was proud of my accomplishment and flexible about scheduling, understanding that good people deserved opportunities to grow. 6 months later, my life had transformed in ways I could never have imagined. The investigation firm promoted me to senior associate after I successfully solved two difficult cases involving financial fraud. I'd moved to a better apartment, but I kept it modest and comfortable rather than trying to impress anyone with luxury. Most importantly, I'd maintained my relationships with working class friends while building new connections in professional circles. Madison and I developed a closer relationship than we'd ever had as children. She'd started dating a teacher she met through volunteer work, a man who appreciated her intelligence and kindness rather than her family connections or appearance. He drives a 15-year-old Honda and splits the check on dinner dates, she told me with genuine happiness. And he makes me laugh more than anyone I've ever known. The experience taught our entire family that authentic relationships are built on character and shared values rather than superficial success markers. Money and social status can attract people, but they can't create genuine love or loyalty. The working class life I'd been living wasn't something to be ashamed of. It was honest, dignified, and meaningful in its own right. As I reflected on the events that had changed everything, I realized that Derek's criminal scheme had inadvertently given my family a precious gift, the opportunity to discover what we really meant to each other when everything else was stripped away. Under pressure, we'd chosen to support each other rather than protect our individual interests. We'd learned to value courage over comfort, honesty over appearances, and love over money. The restaurant uniform that had supposedly been too inappropriate for Thanksgiving dinner hung proudly in my closet, a symbol of honest work and personal integrity. I still wore it for my part-time shifts at Giuseppe's, and now my parents understood that it represented something worthy of respect rather than shame. Derek Kellerman was serving a 25-year prison sentence for attempted murder, fraud, and extortion. Marcus Dalton received 15 years for his role in the conspiracy. Both men had been ordered to pay restitution to their victims, though recovery of stolen money was limited due to their expensive lifestyles and gambling habits. But their punishment was less important to me than the positive changes their crimes had triggered in my family. We'd emerged from the crisis stronger, more honest with each other, and more appreciative of what really mattered in life. The final lesson was perhaps the most powerful. Sometimes the people we underestimate are exactly the ones we need most when everything falls apart. My parents had dismissed me as unsuccessful because I didn't fit their definition of achievement. But when their family was threatened, the qualities they'd overlooked in me, the resilience and street wisdom I'd developed through years of working class life, became exactly what saved us all. As we gathered for our second Thanksgiving, together a celebration built on genuine gratitude rather than social performance, I looked around the table at faces that reflected real love and acceptance. No expensive decorations, no designer clothes, no pretentious conversation about wine pairings or investment portfolios. Just a family that had learned to value each other for who we really were. Sometimes the most valuable lessons come wrapped in the most painful experiences. Sometimes the biggest threats reveal the deepest strengths. And sometimes being excluded from one dinner leads to being truly included in a family for the very first time. The boy who'd grown up feeling like a disappointment had become the man who saved everyone he loved. The restaurant worker who'd been deemed not good enough for a family photo had turned out to be exactly good enough to protect that family when it mattered most. In the end, Derek's scheme had failed not because of sophisticated police work or legal maneuvering, but because he'd underestimated the power of genuine family loyalty and working-class resilience. He'd mistaken kindness for weakness, humility for failure, and honest work for lack of ambition. But now I understood something Derek never could. True success isn't measured by bank account balances or social media photos. It's measured by how you treat people, how you respond to adversity, and whether you're willing to sacrifice your own comfort to protect those you love. I'd found my place in my family, and more importantly, I'd found respect for myself and the journey that had brought me to this moment. The uniform that had once been a source of shame had become a badge of honor. The job that had seemed like a dead end had prepared me for opportunities I'd never dreamed of pursuing. And the brother who'd been excluded from one Thanksgiving had helped create many more Thanksgivings built on genuine gratitude, authentic relationships, and the kind of love that grows stronger under pressure rather than crumbling at the first sign of trouble. What do you think makes a family truly strong during a crisis? Is it shared success and comfort, or is it the willingness to fight for each other when everything else falls apart? Have you ever discovered hidden strengths in yourself or your loved ones during difficult times? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button, subscribe for more real-life stories about family resilience and finding strength in unexpected places. And share this with someone who might need a reminder that every person has unique value that can't be measured by conventional standards. Thank you for joining me on this journey. And remember, the qualities that make you different might just be the qualities that make you invaluable when it counts. Stay strong, stay true to yourself, and never underestimate the power of genuine character over superficial success.